Minister, with Britain leaving the European Union, many supply chains have been disrupted. This has been compounded by COVID-19 and by the war in Ukraine. And we should be supporting Irish companies which are substituting products or components that are being imported from outside the European Union. But our development agencies have a blinkered approach to any businesses involved in this area. We need to address that.
Deputy, to be honest, I'd maybe like to have a more detailed conversation with you about this, because I'm not quite sure what you're getting at, because the response I have here is about import substitution more generally, which is, predominantly not allowed under WTO rules and so on. But just to maybe go through some of it, and then we can try and get at what you're really looking for. Success on export markets is crucial to the long-term growth of Irish businesses and the Irish economy. Assistance for companies focused on growth through international sales is a priority, as you know, for my department and for our enterprise development agencies. A keen knowledge of the competitive and sometimes challenging environment in which Irish companies operate is a key to successful export growth. Through its Market Research Centre, Enterprise Ireland, for example, utilises world-class market research reports on behalf of its clients in order to prepare companies for their export journey, equipped with the latest data on trade and market entry requirements, in particular for non-EU markets. Enterprise Ireland also has a programme of trade missions, trade fairs and knowledge events that give clients the opportunity to connect with existing and new customers, access key decision makers, increase sales in international markets and exchange ideas. Enterprise Ireland has expanded its global presence through the opening of 8 new offices in third country cities, including Montreal, Seattle, Melbourne and Ho Chi Minh City. These offices are being embedded into Enterprise Ireland overseas networks and will help to build new buyer relations in markets where growth opportunities have been identified and where market entry challenges can be identified, including the practice of import substitution if it arises. Import substitution is a policy of blocking foreign imports and is, of course, a non-tariff trade barrier in the context of World Trade Organization rules. The WTO has a number of agreements in place in an effort to curb such measures, and the EU Commission, on behalf of the European Union, uses various tools to enforce commitments and rules, including on import substitution under international trade agreements. One of these tools is dispute settlement at the WTO.
Yeah, look, Minister, I'm not talking about at that level in relation to it. And look, I have raised this issue before here in this House. And look, the reality is, despite all of the supply chain difficulties that we have, despite the challenges we have in relation to currency fluctuation and general inflation impacting on competitiveness, which is causing difficulties, particularly in certain sectors, we have no focus whatsoever on how we can address these by supporting indigenous companies to meet some of those import needs. Now, when I've raised this with your predecessor, your predecessor said that import substitution wasn't being raised by Irish businesses or domestic stakeholders through their engagement with businesses in this country. Now, clearly, this is a problem. Costs have gone up. Sourcing materials is becoming a bigger issue. The dogs in the street are talking about this, and yet we cannot address this, and I'd ask you to look at it.
Deputy, I think we are addressing it, but perhaps not in the sort of formal sense that you're asking. So if you take grain, for example, Ireland imports, it's one of the very few agricultural products that we import substantial volumes of in terms of feed grain and so on in Ireland. The Department of Agriculture has looked at specifically supporting Irish farmers to grow more grain in response to that exposure because of the impact on the war in Ukraine and grain prices going up. It exposed a reliance that Ireland had on imports from markets that are now severely disrupted. So, it is a good example of trying to restructure our own systems and create business opportunities here to grow products that perhaps we can produce in Ireland more efficiently than importing from other parts of the world. And I'm sure there are other areas where we can do the same. Seaweed was mentioned earlier. We should be able to produce enough raw material in Ireland for all of our seaweed companies that are adding value. Yet many of them are forced to import from abroad. But what we can't do, just to be clear, is we can't deliberately disadvantage companies that are selling into Ireland by putting up non-tariff barriers to do that. Instead, we build an efficient indigenous industry in Ireland that can compete and win.
Minister, and that's the very point that I'm making. I'm not looking for any tariffs to be put up, and tariffs have not suited our economy, and all we do is look at history in relation to that. And one indigenous crop where there's huge potential in relation to it is the whole area of hemp. And there's issues in relation to the regulation and licensing of that in this country. What I'm talking about is developing and supporting businesses here in this country that are replacing product that's coming from the other part of the world and coming from outside of the European Union. Now, we know with EU state aid rules there's far more flexibility post-COVID, and as a result of the war in Ukraine there's flexibility in relation to state aid rules, and yet we are not coherently as a state looking at the potential to be supporting our own businesses. Like I said earlier on in relation to the whole renewable energy sector, the focus is on export rather than meeting our own domestic needs. And there are demands there, there are deficits there, and we should be looking at it, Minister.
Certainly on the renewable energy sector, Deputy, we're first and foremost trying to decarbonise our own grid. So, but we recognise that the potential for renewable energy generation in Ireland goes way beyond our own domestic needs. And I see energy in a similar way to I see dairy product. We produce a lot of dairy product in Ireland. 85% of it gets exported. By 2050, we'll be in the same space from an energy perspective, from a clean energy perspective. We'll be exporting large volumes of clean renewable energy that will be facilitated through a hydrogen industry, through ammonia, through interconnection, and that's a good thing. Ireland is one of the most globalised economies on the planet. We import and export easily. We don't put barriers in place. We want to limit state aid interventions where possible so that we can compete, and our companies that aren't faced with barriers when they're looking to enter new markets. So we have to be willing to apply that to the other countries that we trade with as well and import from. But I take the point you're making. We can potentially look at some strategic sectors where we could do more at home and build an indigenous industry to reduce perhaps a reliance on imports from markets and countries that have proven to be disrupted.